Have you ever stopped to think about why an explosion is just instantaneous, a flash of light and energy, while the iron gate outside your house takes years to slowly rust away? They're both chemical reactions, so what's the difference? Well, it all comes down to speed. Today, we're diving deep into reaction kinetics, the science that explains why some reactions are incredibly fast, others painfully slow, and how we can actually control that speed.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics. What do we even mean by a reaction rate? Then we'll zoom way in to the molecular level with something called collision theory to see what's really going on. After that, we'll look at the different knobs we can turn to change a reaction's speed. We'll visualize how energy is spread out in a group of molecules. And finally, we'll use all that knowledge to really understand the two big players, temperature and catalysts. Let's jump in.
So first things first, to really understand the speed of a reaction, we need a way to talk about it precisely. It's not enough to just say a car is fast. We say it's going 60 miles per hour. We need that same kind of measurable, concrete definition for chemistry. And the entire field dedicated to this is called reaction kinetics. It's not just about timing reactions. It's about understanding the why behind the speed. Why does this reaction happen in a nanosecond? And what can we do to make it go faster or maybe even slow it down? It's really the science of controlling chemical change. So what is the rate we're measuring? Well, in chemistry, the rate of reaction is simply how much the concentration of a substance changes over a set amount of time. We can look at it in two ways. We can either watch our starting materials, the reactants, and measure how quickly they disappear, or we can watch our final substances, the products, and measure how quickly they appear. The formula says it all. It's the change in concentration divided by the change in time. It's just a precise way of asking how much stuff is changing every single second. Okay, so now that we know how to measure the rate, let's get to the really interesting part. Why do reactions happen at all? To do that, we have to shrink ourselves down and look at what individual particles are doing. And that brings us to a really core idea in chemistry, collision theory. At its heart, collision theory is pretty simple. It says that for any of our starting particles to turn into products, they have to physically run into each other. They have to collide. But, and this is so important, just bumping into one another is not enough. In fact, the huge majority of collisions that happen are totally useless. The particles just bounce off each other like billiard balls, completely unchanged. So what's the secret sauce? What makes a collision effective? The kind that actually results in a chemical change? Well, two things have to be true at the exact same moment. First, the particles have to hit each other in just the right way, with the right parts lined up. We call this the correct orientation. And second, they have to smash together with enough energy to actually break the chemical bonds that are holding them together. And this picture shows it perfectly. Over on the left, you see an ineffective collision. Yeah, the particles hit, but they're not lined up right, so nothing happens. They just bounce away. It's like trying to fit a key into a lock sideways. It doesn't matter how hard you push, it's not going in. But on the right, that's an effective collision. The orientation is perfect, and they hit with enough force. That's the magic combination that lets old bonds break, new ones form, and a product be made. That idea of enough energy leads us to a crucial concept, activation energy. You can think of it as the energy cost of entry for a reaction. It's the absolute minimum amount of energy that colliding particles need to have for the reaction to even have a chance of happening. If they don't have enough energy to pay this price, nothing happens, even if they line up perfectly. This diagram is a fantastic way to visualize it. On the left, you have your reactants, just sitting in a stable, low-energy state. To become products over on the right, they can't just slide over. They first have to be pushed up and over this big energy hill. The height of that hill, the amount of energy needed to get from where they start to the very peak, that is the activation energy. It's the barrier every reaction has to overcome. So, if the speed of a reaction all comes down to how often these effective collisions happen, that means if we can find ways to make them happen more frequently, we can actually control the speed of the reaction. These are the levers of control we can pull in the lab. And there are 5 main levers we have at our disposal. We can increase the concentration, which just means cramming more particles into the same space, making collisions more likely. For gases, increasing the pressure does the same thing. For solids, we can increase the surface area. Just think about how much faster sawdust burns than a big log. We can also raise the temperature, and we'll see exactly why that's so powerful in a minute. And finally, we can use a special ingredient called a catalyst. Now, to really understand why something like temperature works so well, we need a way to see what's going on with the energy of the particles themselves. Because here's the thing. In any sample, not all particles have the same amount of energy. To understand this spread, we use a really elegant tool called the Boltzmann distribution curve. So let me ask you this. If you have a glass of water, are all of the H2O molecules inside zipping around at the exact same speed? Do they all have the same amount of kinetic energy? The answer, maybe unsurprisingly, is no. There's a whole range of energies, and how they're distributed is the key to everything. And this is what that distribution looks like. This is the Boltzmann distribution. Think of it as an energy census for all the molecules. Along the bottom, you have energy, going from low to high, and up the side, you have the number of molecules that possess that amount of energy. You'll notice the curve starts at 0, no molecules have 0 energy. It peaks right around the middle, which tells us that most particles have a sort of average, intermediate energy. And then it tails off to the right, showing that a very small number of particles are super high energy outliers. Okay, now let's connect this back to our activation energy. We can draw a line on this graph representing that minimum energy requirement, our EA. And here is the big takeaway. Only the molecules to the right of that line, the ones in the shaded area, actually have enough energy to react if they collide correctly. And as you can plainly see, that is usually a very, very small fraction of the total population of molecules.
So, if we want to speed up a reaction, our mission is clear. We need to increase the number of particles that are in that powerful shaded area. Let's see how temperature and catalysts get this job done, but in two completely different ways.
So, what happens when we turn up the heat? Take a look. The new orange curve represents a higher temperature. The whole curve gets flatter, broader, and shifts to the right. The average energy is higher, sure, but look at what happened to the right of our activation energy line. The shaded area representing particles with enough energy to react is now dramatically larger. We didn't change the energy hill, we just gave a whole lot more of our molecules the power to climb. Now let's talk about catalysts. A catalyst is like a chemical magician. It's a substance that makes a reaction go way faster, but it doesn't get used up in the process. And here's how it does it. It doesn't give particles more energy. Instead, it creates a brand new, easier reaction pathway. It basically builds a tunnel through the activation energy hill. And this graph shows the magic perfectly. Notice, the Boltzmann curve itself hasn't changed one bit. The particles have the same distribution of energies as before. But the catalyst has introduced a new, much lower activation energy, which we're calling EA-cat. It moved the finish line closer. And by doing that, a much, much larger proportion of the particles already have enough energy to make it over this new lower barrier. So let's put it simply. Increasing the temperature is like giving more people the strength to jump over a very high wall. Adding a catalyst, on the other hand, is like just making the wall shorter so that more people can get over it with the energy they already have. Both get the same job done, more successful crossings, but through two totally different strategies. And just so you know, catalysts generally come in two flavors. A homogeneous catalyst is in the same physical state as the things it's reacting with, like a gas catalyst for gas reaction. A heterogeneous catalyst is in a different state, like the solid platinum in your car's catalytic converter that works on the exhaust gases passing over it. Okay, let's wrap this up with the key points. We learned that reaction rate is all about how fast concentration changes. For a reaction to happen, we need effective collisions. That means correct orientation and enough energy, called the activation energy. The Boltzmann distribution curve shows us that only a tiny fraction of particles usually have that energy. And finally, we saw that we can speed things up, either by raising the temperature, which gives more particles that energy, or by using a catalyst, which just lowers the energy they need.
And I'll leave you with this thought. This isn't just theory for a textbook. The ability to control the speed of reactions is what makes our modern world possible, from creating new materials and medicines in factories to the enzymes in every single one of our cells. Those enzymes are just hyper-efficient biological catalysts. So in a very real way, understanding kinetics is understanding how our world and even our own bodies actually work.